Welcome back, everyone. So excited to be here with you all for the third and final plenary of the day. My name is Thaddeus Ferber, Executive Vice President here at the Forum. I was asked to share how long I've been here. Yesterday was my birthday and hit the tipping point where I have actually now been here half my life. I will let you figure out how old that makes me. One of the consistent things from the very first starting of the Forum is the notion of ideas to impact. And you heard that KP, Karen Pittman, embodies that in who she is and everything that she does. And that's really been baked into the very fiber of the organization. And so want to open it up to the last poll everywhere question as we all think about, all right, we've got all these ideas. How are we going to drive it to action? So you'll click the poll everywhere link in the chat and we'll share what are you planning to do tomorrow with all of this new learning. While the votes are coming in, I'll share one thing I'm going to be doing tomorrow. Taking away tomorrow was the polling question that showed that across the board, people want bold changes right now. And that's going to be very helpful for our work with policymakers. We've definitely been hearing some people saying, well, it's going to be hard enough for schools just to reopen, let alone trying to partner and do new things or to try new things and new approaches. And having those poll questions showing the widespread demand of, can we please not just put things back together the way they were before, which frankly wasn't working for so many young people, but we actually have the political support to make bold changes. All right, more time thinking and reflecting has been the top poll question. So with that, now comes the fun part as we turn to our final plenary, which is the youth and young adults leading the way. So excited for this one. For us, equity, part of equity is really us doubling and tripling down on the youth in the Forum for Youth Investment. Really working on how do we bring young people into each and everything we do as an organization, and not just any youth, but really focusing on those bearing the brunt of systemic racism, those failed by systems that have been set up to subjugate them rather than support them, because we know that all great social advances from Selma to Soweto to Cairo, it always comes about when young people are leading the way. And so we've been really pushing to find ways to, how can we do even more to position diverse young leaders to drive all aspects of our work? So when you hear us talk about evidence-based policymaking, we are training and paying young leaders to conduct youth participatory action research. When we talk about advocacy, we are training and paying young leaders to take on government relations roles. When we talk about strategic storytelling, we are training and paying young people to share their own narrative, to tell the stories of their lives and their communities in ways that are authentic, so we can replace the false narratives people outside of their communities say with the truth that can only come from the young people themselves. And we partner with organizations to do the same and are going to jump right into this so you can see a real-time example of what this looks like. So we're going to give you a chance to hear a powerful poem written by King Bethel, a 9th grade student who's involved in the Thriving Together program, which is led by the Detroit Zoological Society and Inside Out Literary Arts, a wonderful program located in Detroit, Michigan, which is their mission is to inspire students to think broadly, think bravely, and to share their mission with the wider world. So here's King Bethel telling us what thriving feels like.
Hello, my name is King Bethel, and this poem is called Winning Together. I dug my hands deep in the soil and found a seed that my ancestors planted. I was only digging for help. As I caressed this seed, I was wondering why it was still a seed. I spoke too soon. It emerged from its shell as I held it, but why not when it was in the ground? It had all the soil you wouldn't ask for, All the water we wished was free, yet it grew wild in my hands. I'd wake up the next day, and of course I went to check on it. It was my height. No taller, no shorter. And I thought, thriving isn't just a word. It's a feeling as well. And I'm thriving best when I'm making my family proud. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, King Bethel. That's beautiful and powerful and living proof that art and creative expression get in and stay in for us and for our spirits, and really have the power to connect and move us forward like nothing else. They're the seed that helps us all thrive. I'm Caitlin Johnson. I'm creative director with the Forum's Policy and Strategic Storytelling Unit, which includes our Spark Action initiative. And our work focuses on the power of storytelling, and we resource young leaders who are out building movements, doing the work on the ground, and help connect them with others and make sure that in everything we do, we're uplifting and centering and stepping back to share space and power for their ideas and their solutions. And given how central youth leadership is and youth engagement are to driving our work, I'm really excited that we can begin to even more deeply anchor that commitment in the latest science and what we know and what we're learning about brain development. So to help us do just that, it's a pleasure to tee up our next set of insights from Dr. Mary Helen Immordino-Yang, Professor of Education, Psychology, and Neuroscience at the University of Southern California.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Helen Immordino-Yang. Thank you for inviting me. I'm a social neuroscientist who studies the way that young people grow their minds and their selves. And I'm very much looking forward later to the panel of young people who I hope will demonstrate par excellence the ideas that we're learning in the lab. I'm just going to share with you a little bit about what we're learning about the ways that adolescents' own thought patterns, the way that they engage actively with meaning making and with each other and with their communities and with the world in increasingly complex and nuanced ways, actually appears to be growing their brains in ways that are advantageous into their future. And why this is so important that we think about our young people's own meaning-making ability as the ultimate aim of education and the thing that we're ultimately aiming to support when we engage young people in learning opportunities. So what we're learning is that when you stop and listen to young people's stories, so we do this in a laboratory setting where we share with them real documentary film footage from around the world of teenagers who have done extraordinary things under amazing kinds of circumstances. When we ask young people how they feel about these stories in a private interview, they show us their propensity to make meaning. They basically engage from their own place of self, from their own experiences with a story, like, for example, the story of Malala in Pakistan when she was a young teenager. And they start to kind of on the fly show us how they are trying to make sense out of what they're seeing, this new information that they've never engaged with before. And what we see is that the degree to which kids naturally show curiosity, show us their dispositions for making complex meaning out of what they're seeing, starting with kind of reacting directly to a person's situation. But then sometimes young people also go beyond that kind of direct empathic engagement to also start to think about the bigger meaning for themselves, for their communities, for the world in general. And as young people do that, right, they move kind of transcendently from directly engaging with a person's story to instead stopping to think. And they often come back with these amazing kind of narratives about not just the story, but what the story means for how the world works, what insights it gives them about the nature of their own agency in their community and in their world, and how that agency actually is a force for them to grow themselves into the future. When we see activation in these regions, we can make amazing predictions about that young person's growth, both in their brain and in their personal life, all the way into young adulthood. So what we see is that when young people engage in deep meaning making about stories and then come back with this broader level understanding that they're trying to construct, whether or not it really reflects what an adult would think about that, that complex situation, just showing us the disposition for that kind of curiosity, for that sort of drive or hunger to make bigger meaning out of the stories and to apply it to their own selves and to the broader world, and to situate these stories in a kind of quest for understanding. Kids who do that, regardless of their IQ, irrespective in our data set of their socioeconomic status or of their family's education level or of their ethnic group, right? Kids who show us this disposition activate regions in the brain in the default mode network when they're thinking about stories. The degree to which they do those things predicts how well they'll remember the lesson from the story that they sort of took from it 5 years later. The degree to which they've shown this brain growth over time, which we think reflects kind of their habitual ways of searching for deeper understanding, of bringing curiosity to their social world, of trying to kind of infer bigger lessons for themselves and for their future and for the way the world works or could work or should work, right? That kind of disposition for meaning making is growing their brain over time in such a way that when they do it, we can then predict that as young adults, they report to us that they like themselves more, they are more successful in school or in work opportunities, whatever it is that they are doing at that time in their early 20s, that they like their close relationships more. They have better, what Erickson called, decades ago, ego integrity, right? Identity coherence, which is basically the understanding or sense that myself is true and that I know what I stand for and I know who I am, and that identity and sense of values moves with me through my whole life. So the kinds of outcomes that we really, really value for our young people are predicted by their proclivities toward making meaning and building complex understanding of themselves and their own positionality in the world. And this really, I think, speaks strongly for the need for the kind of work and the kind of thinking and the support in contexts that develop young people, like schools and community organizations and other kinds of family supports and things like that, for young people to engage in this kind of exploration, for them to really develop the dispositions to think and to infer and to make sense and to try out their meaning making on adults they trust, on each other, to kind of negotiate and renegotiate the perspectives they bring to the world over time. That proclivity to make complex mental meaning is really what is producing, we think, young people's or empowering young people's ability to grow themselves, both psychologically and socially and emotionally, and it turns out neurobiologically. So in closing, I think what this really speaks to is the importance of the kind of work that you're doing, and to the real necessity for us to take seriously the patterns of thinking and feeling that our young people habitually come to engage in their educational opportunities. What does it feel like to be a thinker in the space of your classroom, your school, your community, your youth group, your neighborhood, your family? And how is the process of engaging with deep reflective meaning making, and then alternatively applying that meaning in the world and going out and making this more concrete sort of action strategy about what you're going to do, but then stepping back to again integrate that into a bigger story of why, of what the purpose is, of who you are in that space, that flexibility of kind of psychological movement between action and deeper meaning making is the essence of of what adolescents are working on, if we really want to support our young people's intellectual growth and their citizenship in a kind of whole and organized, concerted effort that grows the person in the middle, we need to be attending to the kinds of meaning they make and listening to the stories they tell about their own experiences and supporting them in revisiting, reworking, and ever renewing the content and the analysis of those stories, because that is what real learning, deep, durable learning that actually grows you as a person and as a thinker is all about. Thanks.
I'm watching the comments rolling in the box, and the passion and energy with which that message was delivered, I so appreciate. The reminder that youth development isn't just something we do in the work that we do, but it's also what young people are doing every day and trying to grow themselves and develop. I'm Dave Martino, Director of Design and Innovation at the Forum's Weichert Center. In our program Quality Work, we know how critical it is that young people feel safe and engaged in order to develop agency. In fact, it's the foundation upon which young people and human development occurs. I'm happy to introduce Dr. Delion Gray with thoughts on the importance of belonging for youth to anchor us as we listen to today's panel of young leaders. Dr. Gray is Associate Professor of Educational Psychology and Equity in the College of Education at North Carolina State University. Let's listen to what he has to say about the safe spaces and opportunities for belonging that we create.
If there was one thing that youth were experts in, it would be their experiences in belonging in society and in school. Belonging is the experience of being accepted, respected, included, and supported. And it is linked to a number of outcomes, including better grades, increased motivation, emotional well-being, fewer health problems, and higher levels of engagement. So it is incumbent upon us as adults to serve alongside youth as they lead the way in developing new solutions and innovations that center their voices, highlight their power, and showcase their agency. Let me give you a few examples of youth-led initiatives in the Raleigh-Durham area where I am. The Durham Youth Listening Project is a project that wanted to hear from youth and young people about their experiences and needs and dreams about what they think about the resources in their communities. So these youth interviewed their peers and came up with a list of recommendations for the city of Durham to improve resources for Black and Latinx young people. A second project that I wanted to outline is from a group called Made in Durham, where they continuously give support to youth to lead professional development with adults on the concept of adultism, to help them understand how adults serve youth in very adult-centric ways that don't really serve youth well. And so they focus on how adults can share their power and power build with youth and rethink the power dynamic between youth and adults. The third project that I want to mention is the Freedom Struggle Committee, which is a group of high schoolers in the Raleigh-Durham area who are focusing on building a memorial for victims of lynching. And so prior research teaches us a number of things about youth action projects and what they can lead to. So I just want to share a number of outcomes with you today, because these outcomes are important because they serve as goals for us as we work with youth. One domain is this social domain, which includes connectedness, social support, sense of community and attachment. We want our projects that we do with youth to hit on these dimensions to make sure youth come out feeling connected and supported and affirmed. We also want them to experience a sense of leadership and agency, meaning we want them to feel self-determined, to feel confident, to feel civically engaged, like they can make a difference in society, that they have a sense of identity of who they are and a self-awareness about what strengths come from people in their group. A third domain that's important is around emotional capability, intelligence, and just regulation. So here, youth want to be able to express their emotions, but they also can learn valuable skills about how to regulate their emotions, particularly in situations of conflict. A fourth domain is around interpersonal skills. These are communication skills, assertiveness, active listening, teamwork, etc. A fifth domain is around cognitive skills, which has to do with problem-solving decision-making. Academic and career skills are also important, which has to do with writing, speaking, study skills, goal setting, etc. And finally, what is important above all is the notion of critical consciousness, or the ability to recognize injustices and inequalities and speak truth to power. So through arts, recreation, and music programs, let's support our youth in showcasing their cultural wealth and creative genius to bring us the societal change that we so desperately need and deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. DeLeon and Dr. Mary Helen, for setting up that framing for this great conversation that we're about to have. And welcome, everyone. We're glad that you're all here to wrap up the day with some youth reflections on belonging, connectedness, and the future of movement building. It's a pleasure for me today to introduce our panelists and for this great conversation that we're about to have. With us, we have Pragya Upreti with the Kentucky Student Voice Team. We have Cloud Ben with the New Orleans Summit on Compassion and Resilience. And last but not least, Sophia Jacques with San Jose Conservation Corps. So this is our great panel for today. And I think the best way to kick off this panel is to start off with some reflections of what we just heard from both Dr. Mary Helen and Dr. DeLeon. So to the panelists, does any of you want to give us what you thought of the opening context there?
I don't mind starting and just saying, first of all, thank you so much for having us here today to be able to speak about our experiences, in this evolving and crazy world with so many circumstances, but also reflecting on what happened before. I truly think that there wasn't any better way to put what meaningful youth engagement looks like. And in my time with the Kentucky Student Voice Team, which I've spent extensive time on in the past year, I think it's so important for us to really understand what it means to meaningfully engage young people in the work that we do every day across every system. And it's difficult. It's often difficult to kind of avoid tokenization in some circumstances, but also recognize our stories and our experiences and how we have the power, we have the voice and the experiences, most notably, to incite meaningful change. But I think what both speakers said earlier on agency was what stuck out to me specifically, because, as a young person, we fight constant uphill battles, especially in this work. And youth activism isn't an easy thing, I would say, by any stretch. But it's something that when you have the passion to do it and to fight for it, you're there. You're the first one, at the podium saying something about what's going on, even if that means you're going to get inevitable pushback because of how heavily politicized things are today. But when both speakers were talking about what true agency looks like, I think to me, it feels like a civic responsibility to speak up about the disparities that I see in my education system every day, just because, I'm a student. I spend upwards of 40 hours in the classroom every single week. And if we aren't at the table making those decisions, or at least informing changes to decisions that currently exist, then it's really hard for us to progress in, a positive manner. And so I think when both speakers kind of spoke on that notion of agency, it really spoke to me because I recognize how very few times are we ever, faced with the idea of what true agency looks like. And a lot of times it's checking off a box to see if a young person is sitting at a decision-making seat, but very rarely actually engaging in discussion and even trusting young people in the process of changing things. So really appreciated the framing of that from both of the speakers.
Thanks, Pragya. And I completely agree with you. And I saw a comment in the chat of saying that this is great because it's kind of like matching data with what young people have been saying or like to talk about in their own conversations. And so it's really exciting that we're starting to see this data come out around meaning making, belongingness, and agency, like you've mentioned. Cloud or Sophia, would either of you want to pitch in before we kick off the questions?
Sure. Well, first I want to say thank you so much for having me here. And second, I totally agree with what Pragya said. And I just love the breakdown of how the mental state can also affect certain choices, behavior, and things like that, because the organization I work with also works on those particular aspects of youth, and we also help youth as well. So I really love what the speaker said and the breakdown that both speakers gave.
Yeah, if I could make a comment as well. This is the first time that I'm seeing like people actually talking about the importance of meaningful education and how one of the things I heard was how youth, the most knowledgeable thing for them is their own experience. And as someone who grew up in a very vulnerable community around people who never thought that they'd go to college just because of their own self-identity, because they saw themselves not worthy of it based on their environment, stuff like that, it's really crucial that in the classroom, they're taught more about things on like critical thinking, like how do they think, not just being taught certain things and being expected to memorize it and be tested on it, but actually question how that connects to them and their culture and where that seed is really planted. And I just think it's the way our education system is designed today is definitely an issue. It's not being encouraging to find self-identity. And it really makes me optimistic to hear that there's conversations like this being put out, because that makes me hopeful for the next generation. I think education is so much more important than a lot of people think, because it really creates a pathway for youth to even think college is interesting or something that they're capable of. With just a really good teacher, you could really see a lot of potential in yourself and you can see yourself going to college. So yeah, I just want to let you guys know that I'm like really happy to hear conversations like this happening. And yeah, definitely hopeful for where this can take the education system.
Yeah, thank you all for those remarks. And what's exciting is that we're getting perspective from young people from literally different parts of the nation. So we have Kentucky in the house, we have California, we have Louisiana, and I'm here calling in from Iowa. And it's just really exciting to see how, in preparation for this panel, we had talked about how, regardless of our geographical location, one of the things that brings us a lot in common in regards to how we view the world and our values and the way we want to approach what we want to do to solve a lot of the problems. It's really the environment that has molded our generation. And so I want to start off the conversation with this question. It's no surprise that the millennial and Gen Z generations have literally transformed the workplace. I believe the oldest of Gen Z is now entering the workplace. And when the millennials did, everyone was like, oh my gosh, we have to change the whole workplace. It has to be more fun, all these other things that we're starting to see be implemented. And I think even with COVID, we started to see how the transition was easier for us because we're very mobile, we're very flexible with how we do our work. And with that, there is still differences between generations, right? We see that younger generations strive for meaningful work, which is connected to the context or the framing of this discussion. We seek to be a part of something larger than ourselves and are constantly seeking ways to create impact in our communities and in our professional fields, right? And what better way to show this example than the three of you here? So my question is, if you can share with us in the audience what issues you're currently working on and why these issues have personal meaning or a connection to who you are.
And I don't mind getting started with that as well, because I think over the past year, I've kind of the work that I've been doing with the Kentucky Student Voice team has evolved so much, but has also stayed so consistent. So early last March of 2020, when schools all across Kentucky shut down for even educators as well. A lot of the work that we had been doing at the Kentucky Student Voice team, which, at that point was a group of over 100 students from all across the state that had worked together for advocating for educational equity, but through various realms, whether it was policy or lobbying for different things. So a lot of our time was spent, at the front table, on legislative policies at the Capitol and things like that. Obviously, everything, went remote very quickly, but a lot of our work really surrounded school climate audits and, a lot of before pre-COVID is kind of like the timeline I use in my brain now, is just that we would go in person to different schools and ask students about how they felt in their learning environment, beyond just the simple, like, how are you today? How's the, how, you know, the simple small talk. So we would really delve into what a student's learning experience looked like, because we kind of looked at both the social emotional learning aspect and, of course, you know, just the classroom aspect of it. So once schools did close for COVID, we wanted to continue doing those school climate audits because we knew how important they were, and you know, showing people what it meant to truly show what students were feeling at that moment. It was more than just stressed out. And so we created a survey, entirely student led, and we had several adult allies behind it. But we created a survey and sent it out to students all over Kentucky. It ended up reaching nearly all 120 counties all across our state. And which was almost 13,000 students that took the survey in its entirety. And that was a lot. You know, the number at face value was a lot to take in, but also told us that this work was so meaningful and that young people wanted to be heard. And what we found was very striking. You know, I think at the forefront of everything we've kind of talked about, we've been on so many panels about all of, you know, the work that we kind of took out of this research and what we learned from what students had said. But at the core of it, to me, was just that our education system is so immensely fragile at this moment. And the work that we're doing and the revelations that we kind of took from student stories that responded to our survey about how they were doing told us that normal wasn't working. And, you know, even as we're in this rush to go back to what normal looked like, we shouldn't do that. And if we did put young people at the forefront of those discussions, who spend so much of their time in the midst of these systems that feel like they're collapsing in a sense, then we may be rethinking those things. We might have the opportunity to rethink what those norms were. But I will say that there were, I guess, some of the biggest statistics that came out of our study were that students reported a drastic decrease in the manageability and the meaningfulness of their coursework. They experienced a decrease in their self-perceptions of meaningfulness. And so a lot of the short answer responses that students had said stated that many students felt that most of their content no longer felt meaningful because of the multitude of crises around them. So I think a lot of times we attribute, you know, that moment in time last summer to COVID, and even now we do as well. But very rarely will we look into that moment and be like, you know, there were a lot of calls for racial injustice at that moment, and even now. And so a lot of times we don't take a step back from a more, you know, outside look at what that means for a student's educational environment, but those things really do inform a student's educational experience. So there was a greater desire for students, for their educators to shift from logistical to meaningful communications. Poor and working poor students were disproportionately more likely to have unreliable Wi-Fi access, which almost felt inevitable just due to existing systemic inequities in our education system. Female students saw a disproportionate increase in responsibilities compared to their male peers. So things like that, that kind of, you know, these statistics that kind of bridge together this story that we wanted to put together to talk about what education looks like for students beyond just the classroom. So yeah, that's kind of the work that we've been doing over the past year. And for me, the reason why it felt so meaningful was because I was a student, and to be able to be a young person reading about other young people feeling in some ways similar to the way I did in that moment was really powerful.
The work that I've been doing since like my freshman year has been on human rights and also dealing with youth, especially when living in New Orleans, because youth, especially from the ages of 15 till 24, experience lots of gun violence. They experience a lot of death in the family, tragic events that you wouldn't really expect for a young person to see, because I've been through the same thing. And currently I work with an organization called New Orleans Children and Youth Planning Board. And we focus on youth voices, and we focus on what the youth need, because nobody really talks about that. Nobody really talks to the youth in their stories and listens to them and basically put their ideas into play. And they only use youth as a token to basically do what they want to do and then put the youth on the back burner and not worry about them anymore. But with the organization I'm with, we focus on that and we basically tell you, hey, you are capable of doing these things. You just need to make sure you talk to the right people and you need to make sure that they listen to you. And then sometimes just work with people that are your age and they have the same mindset as you. And that's what we really focus on. And it's very meaningful to me because I've been doing this work since my freshman year. I've worked with Amnesty International, which is a big, huge organization all around the world. And it's passion to me because I've seen things that people at my age shouldn't see. And I've experienced a lot of things at my age that people are very surprised that I've experienced. But I want people my age to know, like, hey, you are capable of doing a lot. You have the ability to do a lot. And you have people that are by your side to help you. So just take that chance and go do it. And then if it doesn't work out, get up and do it again and keep trying, because even though you are young, you have a voice and you could do whatever you want in the world and you could fix the world. Because right now we are still in a pandemic that is very confusing, but no matter what, you have to continue fighting. And that's what we want youth to see, basically.
Thank you so much, Cloud. Sophia.
Yeah, just shout out to the other young leaders with me. That's great work just to hear like other places in the United States that are doing really great work is just really cool. But yeah, I'm here in San Jose, California, and just want to start off by saying I grew up in a predominantly colored community, just Hispanic, Black mainly. And something I noticed going to college in affluent Santa Clara was the really lack of Hispanic students in the classroom. Like I feel like I was in a like culture shock in a way. And it really made me feel like what's going on with like the people I grew up with, like how come they're not like making it to post-secondary education. And as I started to work with nonprofit communities in San Jose, including the San Jose Conservation Corps, where I went to charter school for my high school diploma, I started to do some advocacy with them, and pretty much they have a leadership training for a lot of our crew leaders who do the job training program, which is a program where you can get your high school diploma while working part-time. Half of the week you're in school, half of the week you're working, and that was a way that we help students get by, because a lot of the issue going on in my community is the fact that a lot of kids drop out of school to help pay the bills at home. A lot of kids here have undocumented parents who don't know how to speak English, don't really know how to become self-sufficient. So a lot of our youth are really having to grow up very young and are not able to prioritize education. Other than that, according to like the data that I've gotten to see, is we have a very high rate in teen pregnancy rate as well. I mean, I'm a teen mom myself, so I definitely fall into that. We have a lot of foster youth. We have a lot of youth that are dealing with housing issues, because Santa Clara is one of the most expensive cities to live in the United States, actually. And it's been ever since a lot of the tech companies have moved here. All of the big ones that everyone uses around the world and stuff like that, like Facebook, Netflix, Apple, they're all based here. So what that's done to inner city communities is caused them to kind of fall between the cracks and being able to afford the really high rent increase in the past decade. So that has also been a very negative effect to the community. So a lot of what we've been doing is helping to advocate for our youth, especially opportunity youth. Part of what I do is I help share my story. After I graduated, I ran for valedictorian, so I was able to really, spread some light on, where we come from and how we can still go to college, how we can still do something that we're passionate about. I see a lot of youth around me have a very fixed mindset where they kind of keep themselves in this box and don't really consider their passions or something that could be a dream for them to live. They're more so looking for something that can just help them pay the bills and stick in that. And that's really something we want to change. We want youth opportunity to see themselves definitely like they're capable of going to college, like they're capable of achieving their dreams and stuff. One of the things we've been also working on is we brought Love Jefferson, he works in Los Angeles, California with A1 Adventures, which is another program that helps youth in LA. We brought him over here to San Jose so he can help train some of our youth and really open up them to different conversations and stuff about themselves, really getting them vulnerable and teaching them trust activities and type of different stuff that gets them really excited. They're type of like games that really actually have a deeper meaning to what it is to be like a team and stuff like that. And from my perspective, I've seen youth that I've worked with who really are closed up, really open up and share as if they've never been asked about certain things in their life. And that's currently one way that we're helping. Another way is we launched the Young Leaders Council about a year ago. So we got one young leader to represent from each nonprofit in Santa Clara County. We have ones from Pivotal, which is a foster youth organization. I represent San Jose Conservation Corps. We have a representative for Teen Success Inc., is a Teen Mom program, and many more. So we're all sitting in a board meeting pretty much as like these many youth council leaders, and we have our adult allies working with us. And the goal was to come up with one issue in the community that we all agree is very urgent and how we can advocate and potentially fix that. And one of the things is definitely housing. As I mentioned earlier, housing is affecting a lot of our students. Now that I work here, I'm seeing how many kids actually live in their cars. We also have a tiny homes project that was launched by our CEO, working with graphic design students at West Valley College, where they design these tiny homes. And we have some actually on the site where I work, and we have been able to house students in that way, just so they can focus on school, because we're finding that housing is being a huge anchor in students prioritizing college, because they have to work so much and they can barely even get their high school diploma. So currently we've been gathering data. We created a housing survey where we created all the questions based on our own experiences. And we're hoping to get at least 200 youth in San Jose from the ages 13 to 23 to fulfill that survey. And then we're hoping to take it to the mayor, county, city folks with the connection of our adult allies that we have working with us, to be the youth to actually tell them, you know, like, this is something urgent. We need to start raising money for affordable housing programs, because this is potentially what will help the next generation be able to thrive in a self-sufficient way. So that's currently what we've been working on. And yeah, I'm really just hopeful for my community. It makes me passionate because it's where I was raised and grew up. And I still have a lot of friends who I really see the potential in them, but they don't see it in themselves yet. And I'm just hoping that with this housing program, we can definitely get kids to focus more on education, because it's definitely the route to a more self-sufficient life in the future.
Thank you so much, Sophia, Cloud, and Pragya, for sharing the amazing work that you're not only doing through your education, but in your school. Not only in your school setting, but in your community. And I think that's a very important part of of all the points and themes that come from surface from this conversation, is that the individual in the community who's going to that school is not necessarily being assessed as to what is happening in his environment and how that impacts his learning and in school. And so I guess one of the questions to kind of wrap up this panel and then also have a conversation with our audience about some questions and call to actions is, the way our school system is designed is not set up in the way that Dr. Mary Helen or Dr. DeLeon mentioned in the framing of this conversation, right? There's no real room for this deep reflection of where do I put myself in this world, in my vision of what I can actually become. I think to Sophia's point, she said that the students or her classmates that she knew, they had a very close-minded thinking, or thinking that they didn't have anything outside of potentially what school was, kind of like, telling them that was available. And so, in the conversation of post-COVID, right, we have this great opportunity to reimagine how our systems can change. So if we're looking at education, how can community-based learning or civic engagement in one's local community enhance meaning making in school curriculums and strengthen positive youth development?
I think the most meaningful way that can happen is if we bridge our schools with our society, put plainly. What that means in the work that we do is that we recognize school beyond a simple textbook. We know that we read things, we read court cases all the time in our AP government textbook, but very rarely are we ever going to get involved with the things going on in our world right now. In fact, with the Kentucky Student Voice Team and Student Voice, the national organization, we actually filed an amicus curiae brief on a very important Supreme Court case that is currently, it had already reached the Supreme Court, and we just heard oral arguments within it on what student voice could look like in the future. It's on off-campus student speech. The court case is called BL v. Mahanoy Area School District. And it was probably one of the biggest landmark free speech cases of this decade, following Tinker v. Des Moines. So we actually were able to, a lot of youth activists that were working on the amicus curiae brief were able to meet with Mary Beth Tinker, who's like the iconic student voice free speech advocate. And to be able to do that, I think really told me how our schools are not bridging what we learn in the classroom with what we see in our societies. So many times we learn about all of these court cases and their implications in history, but very rarely do we connect that to the things that we see today. I remember our US history teacher we had a discussion about this in our class right as this court case had oral arguments just a few weeks ago. And even hearing the 9 justices debating the very implications of this case showed me that like the work of young people is so deep, and it's so deep and so wide. We filed this brief with Houston Independent School District Student Congress and March for Our Lives, which are 2 big, very big networks of young people all across the country. And to think that the reason why we did that was because we recognized its direct implications for youth voices who, for young people who do say stuff against disparities that exist in our education system, obviously for reasons just to improve the way systems are today. I think, we saw the direct threat of it. So I say all that just because I think that a lot of times we try to take our work, and we say this a lot in our group as well, from protest to policymaking, because we recognize that if we can share our voice as many times as we want, we can be on as many panels and discussions about this as possible, but unless we're at those decision-making tables and forming real policy changes, nothing feels like it's going to change, at least in a meaningful way, in a way that'll last. Because, realistically, do we really want to be here talking about all the issues, going on in our school systems? No, but we are, because we recognize that nothing's going to change if we don't step up from the sidelines and do something. And so I that's one of the biggest things that I think, a lot of my work with Student Voice, the national organization, is surrounds civic engagement, because I think that is something that very often goes thrown under the bus. I think that, and I've noticed this in my school as well, that a lot more attention and even financial support is given to students that are pursuing STEM degrees, but very rarely with, civics in our schools. And so I definitely think, our schools, and one of our biggest, one of our mentors at the Kentucky Student Voice Team says this so much, and it really resonates with me when he says that our schools are incubators for our democracy, because if we don't train our young people to meaningfully engage in their community by looking at things that are happening, on the news every day, we're failing in some realms. And I think that's, preserving the integrity of our democracy within our schools is such an important task. And as we kind of ease back into what normal looks like for so many people, I think that should be at the forefront of our conversations, is one, ways in which we can bridge our schools and our society, 2, getting rid of that tokenization of young people and meaningfully moving from protest to policymaking. And at the end of the day, recognizing that our stories and our experiences should genuinely be used to impact meaningful policy changes.
Yeah, I so love that. Those are like 2 great hashtags that we can do for not only for this conference, but just for getting the ideas out there, right? That's amazing. Cloud or Sophia?
for me, especially since I live in a city that's very tourist-like, down here we are actually trying to get because our education system in Louisiana as a whole is very terrible, and it doesn't really teach youth about the real world and doesn't teach youth how to be adults. And it only teaches youth how to fail and how to not be something in life. And so basically for me, it's to get youth out of the street and get youth into internships or jobs or mentorships, or get them a mentor to teach them how to actually be in the real world, how to get a proper job, how to make a resume, things like that. Because I never knew how to make a resume until I forced myself to be in the organization I'm with, because I didn't want to be involved. But when I got into it, I was like, oh, this is amazing. This is going to be fun because this is something I really love. And then they actually helped me build out a resume. They helped me actually learn how to do certain things that I didn't even know how to learn in school. So for us, for the organization I'm with, we are pretty much working on how can we get youth involved outside of school and involved in jobs, involved in internships, involved in things that they are available for, because we don't want youth out in the street causing a lot of chaos that could get them in trouble, maybe in jail, maybe killed, because that is a very high rate in my city and we do not want that. And basically we also want to teach them how they can apply themselves and how they can apply themselves to different colleges and basically see themselves in a different light and not as someone who's just going to fail and die at a young age, because that's something we're not striving for. We want everybody to achieve and we want everybody to grow, and we want to get people out of this city and then come back and help the city grow even more than being a tourist city. So that's what my main focus is at the moment.
Cloud, I think you brought up a great point. And earlier in this week, it's connected to this, connecting youth to jobs, week that we're all a part of, all these advocates are in regards to the youth. One of the things that was mentioned or brought up was that if you look at the places with the highest unemployment rate, it correlates with the highest rates of violence. And it has to do with what is happening in the community. How can we reinvest in those communities so that young people can be active in their community and do other things like you're mentioning, getting a job, working through a nonprofit, being plugged in with their community, a community-based organization. So all of these issues are very much connected because our schools should be the heart of our communities and the young people and leaders that we develop out of that. Sophia, last but not least.
Yeah, I definitely agree a lot with Cloud's point as well about like connecting the youth to their community that's already there. I think one issue in the school system where I'm at is there's a lot of nonprofits that have really great resources, stuff to help, and different volunteering activities and opportunities that could really potentially open the mind of youth and really just give them some exposure to something outside of their life that they don't have. But the problem is, I see a big gap in the bridge of connecting the youth to these nonprofits, because once I got involved with the organizations, I realized it's a lot of just low rates of people who are involved with them. And I'm wondering how are kids in the continuation schools, there's so many of them, but they don't know about all these resources to help them. And that causes a lack in them getting exposed to volunteering opportunities. Because that was one way that really changed my in the box mindset, as I talked about earlier, because I once was in that same mindset too, where I didn't really know where I was going. I saw my teen pregnancy as something that was going to hold me down rather than a motivation to lift me up. But when I started to expose myself to other people's issues and started to see that there was a deeper meaning about what our community is and stuff, I started to realize that, my problems are not as big as I think, because there's a lot of us in the community who are dealing with so many different things. And I started to feel more grateful for what I did have. And I feel like that is a huge thing that youth really need exposure to, just knowing what's going on in their community, seeing the data that they're actually part of a statistic or they're part of a pretty much, they're a product of the system. And I think a lot of them don't realize that. They don't see that because they're not exposed to seeing the actual data that shows the area you live, there's low graduation rates, but in this other area, there's high graduation rates. Like just knowing that knowledge is a lot of power, because that shows you that it's not your fault based on the environment that you grew up in. It's just based on the lack of resources, the lack of knowledge, the lack of good influences of your peers and people who are able to tell you different. And I think that is something that could really change a lot of people if they really understood really all of the information that I got access to, and really just taking into perspective and reflecting on, okay, now that I know all of this, like, what am I going to do with that information? Am I going to just kind of stay where I'm at, or am I going to try my best to get out now that I know that I don't have to stay here, you know? And so I think that's really, really important, that community is connected more to the education system, and that we create a way where it's exposed more in school and stuff like that. I think another thing too is career exploration. And I don't know why in the high school system, or even middle schools or elementary schools, that we don't have people who work in careers already like come and teach about their careers and talk about like what it's like to be in that career, or expose young people while they're still in school to different jobs. I think that's something that's really needed too, like, because a lot of kids are expected to just go to high school, finish, and then be expected to know what they're going to major in. And a lot of them, especially where the opportunity youth that where I grew up with, they've never even left their city. So how can they know much about themselves or what they're good at, or all of the different type of things, you know, like traveling is important too, to get to know yourself. And I just feel like if we were able to implement something in the school system that allowed people to be more exposed to different things, that could also really help them have a better idea what they want to do after high school. Because the last thing you want is the youth to be lost or not really know what they're good at or passionate about, and then just kind of them settle really early on. Because we know that if they do that and they take a few years just at a full-time job trying to make money, then they usually get stuck there or start college very, very late, in their late 20s and stuff, which really holds them back. So stuff like that too could really, really help our education system.
What a great point, Sophia, especially now with a lot of the things that the administration and members of Congress are passing. There's a lot of money floating around, and there's a lot of things that one of the silver linings from the pandemic, that the federal government is really sending a lot of money to state and local to do a lot of the things that we mentioned on the call, right? The $350 billion through the American Rescue Plan for state and locals for disaster relief, for a lot of things, American Families Rescue Plan, the American Jobs Plan, all of these things allow us to then rethink how we want to really invest and change the way that things have not been working in the normal, like we have all talked about. And so my hope here is that folks are listening to all the great work that is being done across our country with the help and leadership of young people, of course, to let folks know, hey, this is not working for me. Hey, we need to change this, right? So I hope that we continue to work together as a collaborative, young people, allies, stakeholders, folks who have the information on policy, to get this message across to young people and have that information to then be empowered in your community to then say, hey, what are we going to do with all of this great funding and resources that are finally being pushed to state and local? Which is a great transition actually to an announcement that I want to plug in. So what you've experienced and witnessed here today, this great conversation of young people and the issues that they care about, it actually exists, and we do this once a month through Youth Action Hour, which the Forum for Youth and Mass and Spark Action is a founding partner. So I just want to make a huge plug. Our next Youth Action Hour is actually May 27th, so next week. And every Youth Action Hour is based on a theme. Our first one was on April 30th. That was called Youth Address the Nation. It focused on the 100th day of the Biden administration. This one on May 27th is focused on curating Black youth voices. So it's called Black Youth Power Hour. And we will be discussing a lot of things about not only how the movements have changed from after the George Floyd protests, but also just talking about the way young people are really changing the way that we're organizing, protesting, and doing a lot of the things that young people today have mentioned, which is moving from protest to action. From protest to knowledge, from protest to self-empowerment. And so really exciting. We're putting, Catherine has put the information in the chat, so feel free to check it out. We're always seeking for partners, and we do exactly what you saw here. We bring the youth perspective on these important issues. And we also make sure to translate a lot of this information and build a bridge that's missing in communication from our national partners to young people on the ground. So I do want to also give an opportunity for Cloud, Pragya, and Sophia. You've mentioned a lot of the great work that you're involved with. So if folks want to connect with you to maybe help out and think of ways that they can plug in as partners for what you all are working on, where can they contact you? Where can they reach you? And please make sure to also put that in the chat for folks. But yeah, just let them know where they can get in touch with you. All right, so we have one question here. In your work with peers, do you feel that young people are surprised that there are adults who care what they think they have to say or think? Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
In my opinion, yes. Because there are a lot of adults down here that say, basically, youth opinion doesn't matter. Don't talk, stay in the young person's place. You don't have to get involved with politics. Politics is not what you are. You don't have enough knowledge for that, and so on and so forth. And there are also those adults, especially when you work with organizations and everything, you get very surprised when there are some that are like, actually want to work with you. Because I was even surprised by that when I saw some adults that actually thought like me and actually said, hey, I'm gonna help you with this. I'm going to fund you. I'm going to basically help you plan this out. I'm going to give you money to do the event you want to do. I'm going to sponsor you. It was all of these things. And I was very surprised when I saw several adults that helped us, especially with what we were working on recently in my organization. We were working on a dismantling adultism kit, which is basically how to not use youth as a token and then put them on the back burner, especially in organizations. And we had several adults that we had meetings with, that we talked to, and they said, oh, I like that. I'm going to help you with this. They gave their opinions and everything. And I was just like, oh my goodness, I didn't know there was this many adults, especially in New Orleans, that wanted to help us out with this and get it spread out worldwide. So to me, it's just very surprising when there are a handful of adults that want to help us out with youth problems and help spread youth voices.
Pragya or Sophia, do you all have any want to add to that? We do also have one more question.
I will just second what Cloud said earlier. I think it's like, for me, it's kind of the same thing. Whenever I do come across adults that, at least at the surface level, feel interested in listening to young people, in many realms, it feels almost like they're just trying to check off a box. Like, we have a young person at the decision-making table and that's about it. But yeah, like in our work with the Kentucky Student Voice team, we've had so many incredible adult advisors through the process. And obviously our research had to get IRB approval and so many different things in the research process that as young people, we don't necessarily have as much experience doing that stuff as much as the incredible researchers that we worked with. So, when you do come across people like that, I think it feels like it's just one in a million. But, part of this work just realizes that, like Cloud was saying earlier, the worst thing you could do is just tokenize young people for their work. And I think to someone's question in the chat, the most meaningful ways that adults could support us in this work is just giving us the space to talk about our experiences in a meaningful way. A lot of times it feels like we're like almost storytelling without a purpose. And for me, that purpose looks like inciting change. And if we, talk about, our visions for what a perfect education system looks like, in a perfect world where young people are engaged in every part of the process without, meaningful things coming out of that simple discussion, I think that's where we start to feel like what we're doing and our place in that position no longer feels worthy. So, I think intergenerational partnerships are at the core of any work that we do at the Kentucky Student Voice team, but that all of us here do at whatever organizations we work at. And I think maintaining those partnerships is so important because we recognize that while adults bring, the years and years and years of expertise in a specific field, young people have the experience, and bridging those two together is what, creates greatness in any organization. So I think keeping intergenerational partnerships are at the core of any of the work that you all do. every single day, no matter where it is. I think thinking about that several times often is the easiest way to not tokenize young people for their work, but recognize the ways in which both parties can benefit from all the work being done.
Yeah, Sophia, I'll let you wrap us up with your thoughts on anything that either Cloud or Praga have mentioned. And I think another thing that kind of aligns with the question about how best an adult champion looks like or can show up is, I guess you could say, differences in leadership styles between generations, and how that could be a component when it comes to working with younger people.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what they both said. I think a reason why a lot of people who are in charge who don't like to listen to youth, they tend to think that they know best because they have the degree and they have the experience. And I feel like that's just insanity, because insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and thinking that something's going to change, right? And I do feel a little bit surprised sometimes when I get exposed to adult allies who want to help. I'm like, oh my God, where you guys been all my life? Because it's true, the youth are the ones who are experiencing the actual things. They're living in the generation of today. They're the only ones that have access to the actual knowledge that's up to date on youth experiences. And time changes so much. Like today we have social media as something that can be a positive and negative effect on a youth's development. We have issues like higher rates of mental health, just so many type of issues that are escalating, and that changes the experience for the youth. So it's really important that we have youth at the conversation, on the table, talking about things, because that just helps to get things more on track, more up to date on what youth really need in the education, the community, and everything. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it definitely could be a surprise to people once they first get exposed to it. Young adults who finally are getting that opportunity to speak and share their experience. And I think it's just really amazing that we have at least some people out there who want to help, such as everyone here today who are hearing us. And yeah, as I said earlier, it makes me optimistic, because maybe this is finally the time where we can finally change something now that we're hearing the voices of youth.
That's amazing. I'm just going to end it there. Thank you again so much to Claudia, Ben, I'm going to just restate your organizations again, with New Orleans Summit on Compassion and Resilience, Pragya, I'm so sorry for botching your last name, Upreti with Kentucky Student Voice Team, and Sophia Jackas with San Jose Conservation Corp. It's been a pleasure to be here with you all, and thank you so much for staying in as the last part of this great national meeting.
I am here to bring us into our closing reflection. And so we have another reflection activity that we're going to use to think about the session that we just heard and all that we learned from this incredible panel, sharing their experiences and their reflections. And I think particularly with that closing note about the definition of insanity and of adults assuming that we have the answers, when really the young people who we are here to serve are the ones with the expertise on their own experiences. And so as you take a look at the note catcher that is in the chat, and is on the screen, this is a reflection exercise that we call Glow and Grow. We use this in our Planning with Data workshop, so you can use this around a number of different topics. This afternoon, we're going to think about Glow is about what you can celebrate about your work, and Grow are areas for improvement. And this afternoon, we're thinking about how we're co-creating with young people, how we're supporting youth action and lifting up their voices. And I will add how we are getting out of the way and making sure that young people have the space for their expertise to shine. So just take a moment, we'll put some music on, and you can fill out this reflection note catcher, or you can drop your reflections in the chat about opportunities to celebrate those glows about your work, as well as opportunities for improvement where you can grow in your work to support young people. as we wrap up our moment of reflection, it looks like we've had a little bit of challenge with getting the note catcher in the chat. Hopefully the questions got you started. I think we've got a couple of links in the chat. There's also the PDF you can download as a tool that you can use to continue your reflection on this session, as well as just a reflection activity that you can take back and use in your work. If anyone has any sort of closing reflections about opportunities to celebrate the work or to opportunities for growth, you want to put that in the chat as we wrap up to just share with one another. Lots of inspiration this afternoon and encouragement of really, I think one of the things I'm taking away is the importance for adults to really have some self-awareness about our own limitations and the critical insights that young people have in how to do the work that they feel is important and is that they want to prioritize in the world, and how we can get behind them and support them in doing that. So I appreciate, again, our panelists, and I'm gonna invite Chris to come and wrap us up.
Great. Thanks so much, Kim. Thank you for, again, giving us time and space to reflect and be adult learners, and at the same time use and see some of the great tools that you and your team use out in the field with those who are with us around the virtual room, if you will. A reminder that there is a 4:30 reflections on the day session led by our very own Larry Pasty. Many of you joined Monica at the end of the day yesterday, and Larry will be leading another session and for more informal reflections and small group conversation. So we encourage you to join immediately after our time together today. So I can hardly believe it, but we are nearing the end of this plenary. And then after the reflections, you are onto your evenings and back to your day-to-day lives. Usually we're sending you back to airports or rental car companies at this point, but we will have to bid you adieu from the Zoom at the moment. But for our first virtual Ready by 21 national meeting, I will admit I'm a bit of an old schooler. I never thought I would left with the same energy and commitment and sense of community as I do when we're together in the room, but you did it. You made that happen, and we're so appreciative. I have a handful of admin announcements that we typically do at this moment in the conference, and I'll share a few last thoughts. We have one last exercise that we'll ask you all to do, and then we will wrap up. So the first and probably most important announcement is the Leaderboard Winners, and the only person who gets the honors to do that is our very own Ian Fagley.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your participation over the past couple days in the leaderboard game and in exploring the platform. I have some exciting final results. As of 2:30, we had Rose Newbold in the lead with 4,239 points and Patricia Sasson behind by about 40 points with Enoch Tavares in third place. There was a flurry of activity. It looked like y'all were going pretty wild in the resource center, and we have final results. In third place, and the winner of a $50 Ready by 21 gift card is Enid Tavares with 3,697 points. In second place, winner of a Ready by 21 $100 gift card is Rose Newbold with 4,239 points. And in first place, in a last second pip at the finish line, is Patricia Sasson with 4,297 points, a whopping 100 points in the last half hour of the contest. And the current and possibly contested winner of our exciting staff competition is Paul Lamacchia with 2,831 points. Thank you, everyone, for participating, and I'll turn it back over to Chris.
Great, thanks, Ian. I hope our three winners are making some noise within their own homes. This is usually when somebody's running up to the stage and we're all having a good supportive chuckle together. So congrats and thank you for both the fun of playing along, but also the clear sense that people were engaging and attending sessions and looking at materials. And we appreciate that the platform built in those fun incentives for us to really again, make it as close to our usual in-person experience as possible. So a handful more announcements, and then we will wrap. So secondly, as I say every year, as an organization that is committed to continuous quality improvement and tries to help the field do the same, you should not be surprised that any moment, if not already in your inbox, is our online evaluation at whatever email address you use to register for the conference. We take your feedback very seriously. We try every year to grow and to improve. So we do ask you, later today or tomorrow, while the experience is fresh in your minds, to take a few moments and share with us how we did and how your experience was, so that we can build and grow next year. Third, materials and recordings from all of our sessions are being loaded onto the platform on a regular basis. I think most of them, except for this last one, are probably already there, or if not, will be soon. We have this VFAIR's virtual platform live for 60 days. So they will continue to live there for folks who want to come back and tap into recordings of sessions or additional materials. We'll be making plans to migrate as much as we can after that to the forum's website, but you do continue to have access to the VFAIR's platform for the next 60 days. And fourth, the final announcement, any of you, and so many of you are involved in putting on meetings like this and robust, but there are folks who I would like to say special thanks to. First, of course, let me thank our sponsors again. None of this is possible without the support of our friends at the Wallace Foundation, the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and PwC. We deeply appreciate our ongoing partnership with you. I hope you'll, in whatever way you can, help me make some virtual noise for our incredible staff team. There is probably nobody left at the forum who has not touched and supported this conference in some way, either behind the scenes or in front of the camera. A special shout out to the guy you just saw, Ian Fagley, for leading the core team this year. To him and the small team who really rallied and led us internally, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. This was put together on a pretty quick timeline in a period of great organizational transition, and team, you done well. You made us all incredibly proud, and I appreciate it. And finally, thanks to each of you. We know every year you make choices about where you spend your time, and we appreciate very much that you decide to spend your time with us and with one another. We value our partnerships with you and the chance to work with you in the field to change the odds, and are really grateful for the time that you've spent with us over the last few days. So a few thoughts as we close. During our opening plenary, Chanel invited you to use one word for your hopes for the conference. I think you'll see the word cloud in a moment. And I hope that as we get ready to conclude and you head off to the final reflection session, I hope that the conference has delivered. I hope, like me, you feel inspired, you feel filled with new learning and ideas. You feel like you've made new connections, you've had opportunities, even virtually, to renew longtime relationships. There are so many ways that we try to build in opportunities to deliver on these, and we hope that you're leaving feeling fulfilled and inspired and chock full of new learnings and new thinking. For our final exercise, we're going to invite you to get ready to work into your chats. So get your hands to your keyboards. We like to think this conference is fueled by ideas, big and small. You've heard an awful lot of them over the last, say, 48 hours together. I would love everyone to type into the chat, but don't anyone hit send yet. I'm told this is called a chat waterfall. You're gonna type into the chat an idea that has resonated with you, a phrase, an image, an example, something that you're walking away with just thinking about on your mind, whether it's from this last incredibly powerful plenary or any of the things you've done over the last few days. What are you taking back to your respective organizations or communities? So type away, don't hit send just yet. We'll count to 3 and everyone's gonna hit their return button, and we're gonna see if we can blow up the chat. I encourage you to scroll through it, and we will find ways to capture this and post this so that you can come back to it then as well. Is everybody ready? You type, 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 type. On the count of 3. Yes, a chatter fall. 1, 2, 3. Hit send. Let me close with a few final hopes of my own, and then let you have a moment break before I hope you'll join Larry in the final reflections. So as we part on our 9th annual national meeting, I hope you and those you love stay healthy and well. I hope that the coming year is filled with many more moments together, more joy and more peace. It's feeling like a benediction. I hope we, as all humans I heard earlier, and then especially after this closing plenary, as young leaders and adult allies, I hope we can use the lessons and the innovations and the urgency we all learned over the last year to really, truly reimagine and rebuild our structures, our systems, our policies, our partnerships in ways that change the odds for children, youth, and their families. And as we just heard, can we all keep stepping in and stepping up from protest to policymaking? And finally, I hope we'll see you again before long, certainly at the 10th annual, God willing, in person, coming back out into the field to be together again. So thank you for joining us. We will see you again soon.